Hi and welcome back. In this video, we're looking at the model view template in Django apps. In Django, most projects are usually made up of these three parts: the models, the views, and the templates. And if you're familiar with other terminology, you might have heard of model view controller. Let's take a look at how it works in Django. So far, we've seen that in the project folder, we have urls.py that defines what's associated with what kind of view or function that is going to run to process a user request. In app, which is our new app that we created in the last video, check it out if you haven't already, you've got views.py where we're going to create functions that process the user request and respond to it. But what we're missing is a little bit of context around how these things are linked. So let me tell you a little bit about how that works. Here you've got your user, and they make a request to your website, which is a Django project. Let's say, for example, it's example.com/users or something like that. That comes over to your website, and your Django project is listening to requests that are made to that address. But is /users from the example.com/users part a valid bit of your application? The Django project is going to perform a URL pattern search on the endpoint that the user has requested, which is /users in this case. And it's going to see whether there are any views in your project associated with that URL. So does /users match a Python function or class that can respond to a user request? And that URL pattern search is going to happen here in urls.py. So if the user made the request to example.com/admin, then we would have something associated with that, which in this case is the admin site URLs. But if they made the request to /users, at the moment it would respond with a 404 not found because there is no path for that endpoint. Later on in a future video, we're going to see how to add more URL patterns to these urls.py. So let's say that the user makes a request and there is a function or class associated with that endpoint to respond to the request. Then Django will pass that user request to the view that is associated with that endpoint. And those views are normally defined in a file called views.py. And each app that you create, each Django app, will have its own views.py. In traditional naming, that is known as the controller. So in model view controller, views.py would be the controller. And the views centralize the logic around responding to a request. And they use two other parts of the application. They use the database through models. A model represents a database table, and each model object represents a row within a table. And the models are the only thing that should interact with the database. So if you wanted to get a specific user from the database, you would use the user model to query the database and return a user object. So the view uses the model to interact with the database and get some data back. Finally, the view uses the data from the database through the models to create an HTML response that is going to then send to the user. And that is usually stored in a template. So the view will get data from the database, will insert it into the template so that the template isn't always the same thing. It can vary depending on what you're requesting. And then once it's generated a template with the appropriate data, it will send the response back to the user. So traditionally, this type of architecture is known as model view controller, where the controller is the logic, the view is what you're actually seeing as the user, and the model interacts with the database. In Django, this is known as model view template, because the view holds all the logic. The template is just something that you're going to slightly modify with data coming from the database, and the model is used to talk to the database. So if you hear the term MVT or model view template, you know that it's basically model view controller, but in a Django setting. And that's the structure of most Django apps. And certainly the one that we're going to be building in this workshop will follow this structure. And it's simple, but it really helps you think about how to structure your application. Whenever you want to do anything with the database, you'll create a model to represent the thing that you want to talk about. Whenever you want to respond to a user request, or deal with some incoming data, or produce a response, you'll create a view that holds the logic around the data that you want to use and the kind of response you want to return. And finally, when you want to show something in the user's browser, some HTML, you're going to create a template for it. And there's quite a lot of things that we can do with templates. Templates also have inheritance, and you can use the Django templating language, something that looks a little bit like Python, to simplify the way that we create templates. We'll talk about all of that as we go through this series. At this point, I should also say that we've recently released a full stack Django course. So if you want to learn more about Django and you want to really get to grips with everything that it can do, please consider checking it out with the link in the description. Other than that, thank you very much for joining me in this video. I hope you've enjoyed it and you've learned something new, and I'll see you in the next one.